Hello, amazing students. Welcome to the show. My name is Mr. Viteri. Very excited to be here. We're going to be talking about one of the things that I'm very passionate about: soils. The reason I'm so passionate about soils is because literally a country cannot survive without their soil, and it's so connected to air. It's so connected to water, but more importantly, it's connected to food. And so if your soil goes, then you can't grow any food. If you can't grow any food, you can't supply food for your people or the animals that you're going to eat. And basically, when you can't do that, people get angry, wars start to happen, famine starts to happen, Thomas Malthus and Malthusian theory starts to happen. We don't want that to happen. So learn that you need to take care of the soils. The soils are so important as air, as important as precipitation or water rather. So we need to take care of our soil. So let's go towards it. Let's talk about it. Actually, let's look at this picture. Okay, in this picture right here, what I see is a dry soil. I see some pioneer species trying to inhabit that area, but I see a soil that is experiencing severe drought. And the fact that I can see exposed soil like that, that means to me that if it does rain, that soil will probably get washed away into a stream or a river and eventually into the ocean. And so this is a sad picture. What I typically would want not to see is the soil. What I want to see is cover crops or a certain type of foliage that is growing on top of the soil. I like to think of the roots of grasses or weeds or anything like that as little hands. Those little hands hold the soil in place, and when it rains or when the wind blows, it holds the soil so the soil doesn't move. Now, if the plants are gone, then the soil is going to get washed away and it'll go right into an ocean, a pond, a stream. It will not, and it'll take all that sediment. Remember, we were talking about sediment being heaviest, the heaviest water pollutant that decreases or increases turbidity, decreasing the ability for sunlight to penetrate through water. Pause that if you didn't get all of that stuff, because that was a lot of information right there. All right. So soils are so important. And this picture right here is just a really sad picture. All right, let's continue. Okay. So if I go outside right now and I dig a little hole, I could tell you a couple of things about the soil. First off, color of soil is so important. You can tell the soil's composition by color. Um, Good soil typically is dark in color, maybe even black in color. So I like to think of the darker the color of the soil, the better it is. And also, as you get to a red soil is typically going to be clay, and that's not necessarily a very good soil. If you get to like a yellow soil or light colored soil, like the ugly over here, that's typically going to be indicative of sand. Now, that's not necessarily a good color soil either. So, for instance, you don't really grow crops at the beach, right? It's sand. That sand doesn't necessarily hold water. Now, the opposite for clay. Clay actually holds a lot of water. You can make pots out of water. So plants can't really grow in flooded fields unless it's a particular type of plants. So clay might not be the greatest type of soil. When I talk about a dark colored soil, what makes soil dark is a vocabulary word. It's in your homework. It's called humus. Humus, not hummus, with two M's, but humus. Now, humus is a term to describe organic material. It's a very loose term, organic material. What does that mean? It means living or once living or things that contain carbon, things in the soil. That would mean manure. That would mean a dead squirrel. That would mean dead plants. That would mean dead leaves. As these things start to decompose, they turn darker in color. And that darkened color is filled with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And we know that those are the nutrients that soils need. And so if I was looking at soil by color and I saw a rich, dark color, I would think, oh, that's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It has tons of NPK. Maybe I could plant some crops in here because there's a lot of humus, which basically means there's going to be a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that region. All right. The opposite could also happen. If I saw sand, I'd be like, not a great place to plant crops. If I saw clay, red, and most of New Jersey's soil is clay, and we could look outside of our window and we could see the bare spots of soil, we would see that red color penetrating through. Next time you go down to Merrill Park and you're jogging or you're walking by the little stream there, look at the boulders in the stream, look a little higher, you'll see just a layer of clay. And then you have a topsoil layer that's typically darker in color, but that topsoil level layer is only about 10 inches, maybe less, all right? So soil can be broken down into particle sizes, all right? And in this picture here, we have gravel, but let's take that out of the equation. Soil particle sizes typically are sand, silt, and clay. In that order, sand being the largest particle, silt being the second or in the middle, and clay being the smallest particle. All right, I'll say that one more time because it's very, very important. Soils, all soils are consistently made out of 3 particle sizes. The big chunks, which are going to be the sand, the silt, and the clay. Now, if I was referring to that red clay in the center here, that means all those particles are very, very, very small. In contrast to the sand, the particles are very, very big. So if all the particles are very, very small, water can't necessarily percolate through it. The opposite would happen for sand. Sand, since they're kind of like big boulders, water can go and it is permeable and it can percolate through the ground. So in reality, what do you think a plant really wants? Well, a plant wants something like a mixture of those two. Well, actually, it wants a mixture of all 3, sand, silt, and clay. Okay? So the largest particles are sand, the small particles are silt, and the smallest particles will be clay. All right? You have to understand the relationship between particle size and permeability. The larger the particle size, the more permeable the soil. The smaller the particle size, the less permeable it is. A very easy analogy is when we make clay plates or when we make clay pots, that's going to hold water. All right, clay holds water. Not necessarily a great thing that you want to do when you're thinking about planting crops. You want the water to flow. Okay, so what could you do in an area that has a lot of clay? You could actually add some sand, so then we can increase the permeability of that soil. I digress and I'm going a little too far. But understand, if we have a region that's very sandy and we wanted to remedy that, we could put some clay in that area. Opposite, if we have clay and we wanted to add permeability to our soil, we can add sand to that. And so since I was growing crops in my backyard, and since I said Jersey has a lot of clay, one thing that I did add to my soil to increase permeability was sand. And so by adding the sand, we increase the particle sizes of the soil and water is able to percolate through the ground. All right. Now, like I said before, soil is typically 3 different parts: sand, silt, and clay. Say it again: sand, silt, and clay. In that order, sand is the largest, then silt, then clay. Clay being the smallest. Now, this is a soil pyramid diagram. All right, you need to know how to read it. Basically, all of our soils can be determined and called either clay, silty clay loam, silt loam, silt, sandy loam, sandy clay loam, sandy clay, all these different particles, depending on the percentage of a particular thing they have. They could either have a percentage of clay, a percentage of silt, a percentage of sand. All right. The magic word here, though, probably going to work for most soils or most crops, is going to be loam. So this area, if we were able to get the percentages right to get this area, this will probably be the best type of soil, meaning the most type of crops can do well in this type of soil. Now, I will say that even though loam is like the general best, all right, probably a lot of plant species could survive in loam, it might not be the best for a particular species of plant. Some species of plant may like a very silty clay loam, or a silty clay soil, or a sandy clay soil. So for future farmers, if you're really looking for a particular type of soil to grow a particular crop, then you may want to adjust your soil, all right? Add clay, add sand, add silt to make it so your plant can grow the best as possible. And I've experimented in our little plot of land that we have here at Kennedy. Well, what plants grow really well? Well, I tried to mimic loam, and I did mimic loam. And you know, I grow great tomatoes here. I grow great kale here. Cucumbers grow like crazy here. Squash grows like crazy. Didn't do very well with pumpkin. Did not do very well with watermelon. If I wanted to change that, I could figure out what type of soil is best for these type of plants and try to mimic that in my own crop area as well. All right. So let's figure out how we can read this soil pyramid. And here we have 30% clay, and this is just an example. 30% clay, 20% silt, 50% sand. So we're going to start on the clay section. Notice the numbers. The numbers are in a straight format here. They're like straight, horizontal. All right. It says 30. So I'll take clay and 30, and this is my line. I could actually make a line, and it's a straight line. So we got 30% right here. And then it's going to say clay, 20% silt. So I'll go to the silt side. Now notice this down angle. So this down angle indicates that it's this line. So we got over here. So we got this line. Oh, I'm sorry. We got the 20 line with the down angle coming here. We got the 30 coming here. And then we got 50 coming from sand, and that's going to be here. Look at this weird angle, this up angle. So that where all three intersect, we have sandy, clay, loam. All right. And that's how that works. There may be a free response question. There may be a multiple choice question that tells you, well, what is 40% clay, 20%, and what's that, 40, 20, and then 40% sand? How would you be able to do that? You're going to need to be able to identify this. You should pause the camera right now, make up your own question, and then try to figure out if you know how to read this soil pyramid diagram. Once again, the numbers indicate which line that you have to follow. You can't just take, 30, 60 and then 30. No, you got to find the line that indicates that. Okay. All right. So this is the soil pyramid diagram. It tells you what type of soil depending on the percentages of either sand, silt, or clay that you have. All right. All right. Welcome back. Let's get it. Okay. So now we got to think of what type of questions would be on like an AP exam. All right. I know we haven't talked about landfills yet, but basically a landfill is an area that people dump garbage. Well, now one concern of areas that people dump garbage is, well, if I dump garbage here, when it rains, the rain is going to percolate through the ground. It's then going to go into our groundwater. Now, let's say you had some really bad garbage like batteries, like lead, like oil, like anything that may contaminate groundwater. Do you want to use a potential site for a landfill that has sand? Absolutely not. Because if you had sand, when it rained, it would percolate through the ground, and all that wastewater that goes through, let's say, a medium like a landfill is now called leachate. All right, Leachate. All that leachate is going to go into the groundwater, and that groundwater will be permanently pretty much dirty, and then we would have a shortage of fresh water. So if I was going to potentially build a landfill, I want to choose a site that has a high clay content, because clay is not going to allow water to penetrate through there. All right, so now we're putting the whole idea into perspective. Big particles like sand are going to allow water to permeate through, and small particles like clay are going to prevent water from going through. All right, now so if I were to ask you where would I want you to build a landfill, you would probably choose any of the percentages that are going to be in this rough area that says clay in this soil triangle. Now, if I asked you, where do you want to build a farm? Well, a farm is probably going to want good soil that has good permeability, probably has a nice ratio of 33, 33, 33 of sand, silt, and clay, which is that term loam. So you're going to choose an area that has the type of soil that would fit under this criteria of loam. Okay, so loam is going to be kind of like it has 3 parts equal, has enough sand, has enough clay, that beautiful ratio, has enough silt as well. All right, we've been talking a lot about sand and silt at 2 extremes, sand and clay as 2 extremes. Silt is very, very valuable as well for nutrient exchange. You can think of the silt as a place for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to hang out and grab onto. All right, so all of those are necessary for a particular area to grow crops or to build a landfill. All right. Also, if you're going to build a house, do you want to have build a house in pure sand? Typically, if you look at any of the houses that they are building here in Jersey or even in Woodbridge Township, you often see this red clay. What is this red clay? Did we bring it there, or is it there by itself? Now, typically, I think it's a combination of both. We want to build our homes in clay because clay is like hard as a rock. It's almost like having concrete, right? And so if you build your house in clay, if water then rains on your property and you pitch it properly, the water is going to come off of your property and into the street, going down into a drain. I know it's kind of a double-edged sword there because we do want percolation into groundwater recharge zone, but at the same time, do I want a flood in my basement? No, I don't. Why don't I want a flood in my basement, and how can I prevent that? If I had a clay soil surrounding the perimeter of my house, I know water is really not going to percolate through that in the amounts of volume that it would do in a sandy area. All right, let's continue. Now, how can I determine how much sand, silt, and clay is in a particular soil? There's a cool experiment that we can do, probably do it with the kids that come in. And we're going to go outside and we're just basically going to take a soil sample. Well, then we'll take a maybe 25% filled jar with the dirt sample. We'll fill the rest of the jar up with water, and then we'll shake it vigorously. And then I'm going to lay it on a flat area and allow it to sit literally for 24 hours. What happens after time is that the heavier particles are going to go down to the bottom, and then the lighter particles will go onto the top. And so if your soil had a lot of sand, that sand would accumulate on the bottom. Then you would have your silt in the middle layer. Then you would have your clay at the top. You then could make a mark, right? You then could make a mark on the jar, and you could measure it in centimeters, and let's just make it really easy. Let's say 8 centimeters was sand, that's 80%. 1 centimeter was silt, that's 10%, and 10% was clay. So that would be a way that you could determine the percentage of sand, silt, and clay. And like I said before, we do live in an area that's primarily clay. So when we do it in class, we're going to see a large area with a large amount of clay in that soil. All right. And what we'll also identify is the color too, because we're going to see reddish type of soil. All right. Now, I would like you to remember how to do this experiment, aka demonstration. How can you determine the quantity of soil or the ratio of soil in your house or in your property or in your garden or in your farmstead or in your area where you want to grow it? You simply take a jar, put some dirt in it, put some water in it, shake it vigorously, leave it flat. The heavy particles go to the bottom, the lighter particles go on top, and then you'll see the layers after it sits. You literally see these layers, okay? They might not be so different in color contrast, but you would see the bigger particles, the smaller particles, and then the smallest particles on top. And what's really cool is that when you shake, let's say, this water, it looks all like red. And if you have a jar at the house and you can do this very safely, I recommend you doing this if you have a mason jar. It's a pretty cool experiment. you'll see that that whole water looks dirty and it's basically cloudy, very turbid. But after it sits for quite some time, you'll see all the dirt particles actually fall out. And it's really, really cool because the water on top looks almost clean. All right. Okay. Another thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about soil is the water holding capacity. Say it in your head, water holding capacity. All right. That's how much water that the soil can necessarily hold. Like before, I told you that sand can't really hold a lot of water. So if I poured water in here, all that water is going to go through the sand and we have a big layer right here. Gravel, even more, it doesn't hold any water. Now notice that this water level is smaller than this area. So loam is holding more water than the sand. Clay is holding a lot more water. Notice that there's only a little bit of water through here. And peat actually absorbed all of that water. Peat is another word to describe organic material decomposing. All right, we could say that as almost like humus. All right. So water holding capacity is important because you want to know, what does your plant need? Does your plant like a dry soil? Does it like a wet soil? All right, I've killed many cacti because I can't get the water ratio right. I think the roots need to dry out periodically. And if I continue to water them, all right, they just end up drowning and I kill these cacti. Very, very sad that I kill a cactus. I can't believe I kill a cactus. It's ridiculous. All right. So get in your vocabulary, understand water holding capacity, the ability to hold water. And what's probably going to be the best is, once again, an intermediate, the loam. All right. So we've been using this term quite often now. It's called permeability and porosity. Two different terms. Permeability basically means the ability to go through. All right. I know in biology you probably talked about the cell membrane as being selectively permeable. All right. Well, the soil has its permeability. Some soils are more permeable than others. All right. Clay soils are not permeable versus sandy soils are going to be permeable. Now, there's always a ratio too. So when I say a sandy soil, there's never like 100%. I mean, there could be 100%, but typically over a large area, it's not 100%. All right. So you'll get some of the permeability in clay soils because maybe 80% clay, 10% sand, 10% silt. All right. Now, porosity is expressing something different, but it's kind of related towards permeability. Porosity is how big the rocks are, or how big, or pores, how big the pores are in the soil that allow water to go through. All right, so two different situations there. Make sure you're able to distinguish the difference between there. Another thing that you need to worry about or understand about is that there are some chemical properties of soil. The pH is important. The nutrient levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are important. Not all soils are the same. Some plants do good in acidic soils. Some plants do well in basic soils. Some plants need neutral soils. So if you're going to be one of these people that landscape their property and you want some beautiful roses, it's probably best to understand that you should have the right soil to make sure that your roses grow the best. Okay. And so make sure your pH is right. I'm not going to tell you what pH is great for roses. That's something you're going to do, or whatever type of plant that you want to have. All right. You got to figure out the proper pH. The amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the ratios in there are also important. Some plants like high nitrogen. Some plants don't like high nitrogen. They like high potassium. And so you could add fertilizers, manures that will increase the NPK or whichever one that you need to make sure that the plant that you have is going to have the nutrients it needs to survive, plus the pH. So understand these are some chemical properties of soils, and these chemical properties are going to be dependent on what type of crop that you want to plant there. All right. Now we have another thing that we can determine, like if I wanted to identify, not only by sight, I could look at the soil. I could do something called a soil field test. All right, get that. It's a soil field test. This will be our last slide for today. All right. Now, have you ever had Play-Doh? Or you probably had Play-Doh. And then when you had Play-Doh, you kind of like, you try to make what we call a ribbon. All right. And that would be like a baby worm, if you will, like a dookie. All right. If that dookie can be about 5 centimeters in length, then your soil is mostly clay soil. This makes sense. What I would do is I would go outside, dig a hole, take some dirt, spray a little bit of water on it. Then I would try to mold it. If I have the ability to mold it and make a ribbon that's 5 centimeters or higher, then it's most likely the majority component in that is clay. Now, imagine trying to do that at the beach. Let's go to the beach. I don't know if any of you've ever been to the beach, but if you've been to the beach, there's a lot of sand. If I wet the sand a little bit and I tried to make a ribbon, a worm, a dookie, 5 centimeters in length, it's going to crumble. So the ability to make ribbons is part of the field test. And if I could make a 5 centimeter ribbon, then that makes it a clay type of soil. Okay? All right. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.